My father was a coal miner. All my brothers were coal miners, including myself. And I resent Winston having problems with coal miners in Wales.
Charles Bronson has always been one of Hollywood's most distinctive figures. With his stone-carved face, quiet menace, and ability to convey more with a glare than many actors could with a full page of dialogue, he carved out a career that made him both a box office star and a cult icon. From The Dirty Dozen to Once Upon a Time in the West to the Death Wish series, Bronson became the very definition of screen toughness. A man whose characters didn't talk much, but when they did, every word carried weight. Now, imagine an 80-year-old Bronson, grizzled, blunt, and unafraid to speak his mind, being asked which actors rubbed him the wrong way. Of course, Bronson wasn't one to gossip or complain publicly. But in this tongue-in-cheek countdown, we playfully imagine the kind of performers whose on-screen personas or off-screen reputations might have tested his patience. Make no mistake, this list isn't about true hatred. It's about cinematic rivalries, clashing styles, and characters so arrogant or verbose that Bronson's steely silence would feel like the perfect antidote. From swaggering villains to talkative schemers, these are the 6 nemeses that, in our imagined scenario, Charles Bronson just couldn't abide. Number 6. Lucy Liu, Kill Bill Vol. 1. Charles Bronson was a man of very few words, both on and off the screen. He believed in toughness through action, not chatter. So it's easy to imagine how he might have reacted to Lucy Liu's O-Ren Ishii in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill, Vol. 1. O-Ren, the poised yet deadly head of the Tokyo underworld, delivers one of the most chilling warnings to the bride after slicing down a challenger. You might not be able to fight like a samurai, but you can at least die like a samurai.
You may not be able to fight like a samurai, but you can at least die like a samurai.
It's a line soaked in arrogance, confidence, and fatalism. For Bronson, a lifelong fan of classic samurai cinema, this blend of bravado and bloodshed might have been too much. He admired the quiet discipline of Kurosawa's warriors, the stoicism of Toshiro Mifune or Takashi Shimura, men whose silence carried just as much weight as their swords. By contrast, Liu's O-Ren seemed almost theatrical in her taunts, embodying Tarantino's hyper-stylized violence rather than the restrained philosophy Bronson revered. Still, it's impossible not to admire what Liu brought to the role. She managed to balance elegance with menace, turning O-Ren into one of Tarantino's most unforgettable villains. Tarantino himself has praised her for embodying both grace and ferocity, and her performance became a standout in a film brimming with over-the-top moments. Now, imagine Bronson watching that iconic Snow Garden duel. The quiet snowfall, the rhythmic clashing of blades, the minimal sound design. It's a sequence that almost feels like a meditation. But then O-Ren delivers her line, flaunting her dominance with a smirk. One can almost hear Bronson muttering under his breath, "Too much talk, just fight." What's fascinating here is the contrast in philosophies. Bronson's characters often represented the ultimate minimalist. He spoke little, acted decisively, and let his silence do the intimidating. Liu's O-Ren Ishii, however, is all about performance, cutting words as sharp as her katana. In a way, it's the perfect clash of styles, old-world stoicism versus new-school spectacle. That's the heart of why Bronson, in this playful thought experiment, might have hated O-Ren Ishii. It's not personal, it's about style. Bronson would have seen her as the kind of villain who hides behind arrogance and grandstanding. And for a man who believed in raw toughness without theatrics, that could feel like nails on a chalkboard. But here's the twist. Maybe Bronson also would have respected her. After all, O-Ren is no pushover. She fights to the bitter end with honor, even acknowledging the bride's skill in her dying breath. And Bronson, for all his imagined gruffness, was never one to dismiss a worthy opponent. So maybe his hatred would really just be a grudging nod of respect. Still, you get the sense that Bronson would have preferred the more stoic samurai of the 1950s. Men who let the blade, not the mouth, do the talking. Do you prefer the quiet dignity of classic samurai films or the operatic bloodletting of Tarantino's Kill Bill? Number 5. Denzel Washington, Training Day. When you think of Denzel Washington, you think of authority, command, charisma. He's the kind of actor who doesn't just walk into a scene. He takes it over, owns it, and leaves you wondering how anyone else can keep up. In Training Day, 2001, he brought all of that firepower to the role of Alonzo Harris, the most corrupt cop in Los Angeles, a man who blends street smarts, brute force, and philosophical menace in equal measure. At one point, Alonzo lays out his chilling worldview. To protect the sheep, you gotta catch the wolf, and it takes a wolf to catch a wolf.
To protect the sheep, you got to catch the wolf. And it takes a wolf to catch a wolf. You understand?
It's a line that doesn't just sum up the character, it sums up the entire movie. It's about moral compromise, about the lies we tell ourselves to justify our worst actions. And Denzel delivers it with such conviction that you almost believe him. Almost. Now picture Charles Bronson watching this scene. Bronson, the stone-faced vigilante of Death Wish and the battle-hardened soldier of the Dirty Dozen, would probably feel a strange mix of admiration and disgust. Admiration because Alonzo Harris is tough, ruthless, and unapologetic, qualities Bronson's own characters were built on. Disgust because Alonzo is arrogant, manipulative, and enjoys playing God with people's lives. Bronson's heroes might bend the rules, sure, but they were always driven by a sense of justice. Alonzo, he's just driven by power. That's why Bronson, in this imagined countdown, might put Denzel's Training Day character high on his hate list. It's not that he'd hate Denzel Washington, far from it. Bronson would have respected the craft, the intensity, the sheer dominance Denzel brought to the role, but he'd have despised the man Alonzo Harris represented, the kind of wolf who believes his own lies and uses them to corrupt others. One of the fascinating things about Training Day is how it flips the usual cop movie dynamic. Instead of the rookie learning from the grizzled veteran, Ethan Hawke's Jake Hoyt has to resist being seduced by Alonzo's darkness. It's a film about corruption, temptation, and the cost of keeping your soul intact. Bronson, who built his career on characters who clung to integrity, even if they had to kill for it, would have seen Alonzo as the ultimate perversion of that code. But let's be honest, Bronson probably would have also enjoyed the bravado. There's something undeniably magnetic about Alonzo Harris. The way he struts, the way he bends everyone to his will, the way he believes he's untouchable until the very end. It's the kind of performance that makes you lean forward, even as you're shaking your head in disbelief. And that's what makes Denzel's role so memorable. He doesn't just play a bad guy. He plays the bad guy you can't stop watching. The bad guy who makes you question your own morals. Would you take the easy way out? Would you look the other way? Or would you risk everything to stand up to him? Bronson's answer, of course, would have been simple. Put a bullet in him and walk away. But for us, watching Training Day, it's never that easy. Now here's a thought. If you had to catch a wolf like Alonzo Harris, would you use his methods, or would you find another way? Number 4. Leonardo DiCaprio, Django Unchained. Leonardo DiCaprio has built a reputation as one of the most fearless actors of his generation, but in Django Unchained, 2012, he took that fearlessness to a whole new level. Playing Calvin Candy, a sadistic plantation owner, DiCaprio became the kind of villain who is both charming and revolting, suave and monstrous. It was a role unlike anything he had done before, and Tarantino pushed him to dive headfirst into the ugliness of America's slave-owning past. There's one line that captures the chilling power of Candy's presence. "Gentlemen, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention."
Gentlemen, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention.
Delivered during the infamous dinner table scene, this deceptively calm remark signals the shift from casual host to ruthless master. From that moment on, every person in the room and every audience member watching knows that Candy is in full control. What makes this performance legendary is not just the dialogue, but DiCaprio's sheer commitment. Midway through filming that very dinner scene, DiCaprio slammed his hand on the table, accidentally slicing it open on broken glass. Blood poured from his palm. Most actors would have broken character, called for a medic, and restarted the shot. Not DiCaprio. He stayed in the scene, using his real wound to fuel Candy's menace. At one point, he even smeared the blood onto Kerry Washington's face, an unscripted gesture that horrified the cast and electrified the audience. Tarantino, sensing lightning in a bottle, kept the cameras rolling. Charles Bronson, imagining him sitting through this scene, might have had a complicated reaction. On one hand, he would have respected the toughness. Bronson himself was known for physical grit. He came from a coal mining background, worked with his hands, and lived through the Great Depression. He understood pain, endurance, and what it took to bring raw truth to a role. Watching DiCaprio push through real injury for the sake of authenticity, that would have earned a nod of respect. On the other hand, Bronson might have scoffed at the character of Calvin Candy himself. Bronson's characters thrived on action, not on endless speeches and manipulative games. To him, villains like Candy, who enjoy the sound of their own voice, who grin as they toy with people's lives, were the sort that deserved a quick bullet between the eyes. Bronson's heroes didn't debate morality or posture across a dinner table. They acted decisively and without ceremony. And that's exactly what makes DiCaprio's Candy such a striking foil. He is the opposite of Bronson's brand of masculinity. Where Bronson was laconic, Candy is loquacious. Where Bronson was stoic, Candy is flamboyant. And yet both command absolute attention. Both demand the room. It's worth noting, too, how uncomfortable DiCaprio himself was with the role. By all accounts, he struggled with the racial slurs and cruelty written into the script. Samuel L. Jackson, who played Steven, Candy's loyal house slave, reportedly had to pull him aside and remind him, "This isn't about you. These are the words men like this used. If you don't commit, the story won't hit as hard." DiCaprio listened, embraced the darkness, and gave one of the most unforgettable performances of his career. Bronson, I imagine, would have respected that as well. Because beneath the sadism and bravado, what DiCaprio really brought to Django Unchained was courage. The courage to portray evil without flinching, to hold a mirror to history and force audiences to confront it. Now here's a question for you. If you were sitting at Calvin Candy's dinner table, and he leaned in with that smug grin and said, "Now you have my attention," would you keep your cool? Or would you have to fight the urge to lunge across the table? Number 3. Brad Pitt, Inglourious Basterds. Brad Pitt's collaboration with Quentin Tarantino in Inglourious Basterds, 2009, gave us one of the most colorful and quotable characters in modern war cinema, Lieutenant Aldo Raine. Pitt, with his exaggerated Tennessee drawl and deadpan swagger, turned what could have been a caricature into a cult figure. His famous rallying speech has lived rent-free in the heads of movie lovers ever since. You probably heard, "We ain't in the prisoner-taking business. We in the killing Nazi business. And cousin, business is a-boomin'."
But Warren, if you heard of us, you probably heard we ain't in the prisoner-taking business. We in the killing Nazi business. And cousin, business is a-boomin'.
It's the kind of line only Tarantino could write, and only Pitt could deliver with that perfect blend of menace and comic timing. For Charles Bronson, who actually served in World War II before becoming a Hollywood star, this might have been a moment of both admiration and irritation. Admiration, because Pitt embodies the brash confidence of a soldier rallying his men. Irritation, because Bronson's own war memories weren't stylized or witty. They were bloody, cold, and brutal. Bronson didn't fight for a punchline. He fought to survive. To him, Raine's swagger might feel like Hollywood dressing over what was, in reality, a merciless grind. Still, Pitt's performance resonates because it walks the line between absurd and deadly serious. In the film, Raine's bravado isn't just for laughs. It sets the tone for the bastard's ruthless mission. He's a leader who doesn't sugarcoat the horrors of war. His words tell his squad exactly what's expected, with no illusions of mercy. That bluntness, stripped of sentiment, is something Bronson himself might secretly respect. After all, Bronson's characters in films like The Dirty Dozen or Death Wish were cut from the same cloth. Men who said little but made sure their words carried finality. Another interesting layer is how Tarantino used Pitt's Hollywood charisma to flip audience expectations. Here's a leading man famous for his good looks and easy charm, now playing a scarred, slightly goofy lieutenant who carves swastikas into Nazis' foreheads. The contrast is jarring, and yet Pitt disappears into the role. You can almost picture Bronson watching from the sidelines, squinting and muttering, "Not bad, kid, but tone down the speeches." Behind the scenes, Pitt reportedly loved the freedom Tarantino gave him to lean into the accent and exaggeration. That playful energy translated onto the screen, where Rain became one of Tarantino's most memorable creations. The performance also cemented Pitt's place among the director's go-to collaborators. For Bronson, who was notoriously no-nonsense on set, the idea of an actor hamming it up this much might have felt alien. But even he couldn't deny that Pitt's Aldo Rain gets the job done. He's the kind of larger-than-life figure audiences rally behind, the embodiment of cinematic vengeance. And let's be honest, Bronson himself built a career on vengeance stories. From Mr. Majestic to Death Wish, he was often the man delivering rough justice when no one else would. In that sense, Aldo Rain and Paul Kersey aren't so different. They just speak very different cinematic languages. Now, let me throw a thought your way. If you had to put together a Suicide Squad for a near-impossible mission, would you pick Tarantino's bastards with their over-the-top bravado, or Lee Marvin's Dirty Dozen with their grim, down-to-earth ruthlessness? It's a tough call, but I'd love to know where your gut instinct takes you. Number 2. David Carradine, Kill Bill. Few actors embodied a certain brand of 1970s counterculture cool like David Carradine. From Kung Fu on television to cult films that embraced martial arts mysticism, Carradine had an enigmatic quality that fascinated Quentin Tarantino enough to cast him as the central villain in Kill Bill. As Bill, Carradine wasn't just a swordsman or an assassin. He was a manipulator, a philosopher of violence, and a man who could reduce his enemies to psychological wreckage before even lifting a finger. One of his most memorable lines captures exactly why audiences found him so chilling. "Do you find me sadistic?" You're going to be tempted to ask yourself for what reason. This is me at my most masochistic. Delivered with Carradine's languid, almost hypnotic cadence, the monologue exemplifies why Tarantino trusted him to anchor the second half of his revenge saga. Bill isn't terrifying because of his brute force, though he's certainly lethal with a blade. He terrifies because he enjoys the mind games. He toys with the bride, Uma Thurman, probing her emotional wounds, forcing her to question not just his sadism, but her own choices. Now, here's where we step into Charles Bronson's imagined perspective. Bronson, who built his career on terse men of action, might have had zero patience for Carradine's wordy villain. To Bronson, a bad guy who lectures, philosophizes, and stretches out his cruelty through dialogue practically begs for a bullet between the eyes. Bronson's characters didn't posture, they acted. A Carradine-style villain in a Bronson movie would never have the luxury of finishing his speech. And maybe that's what makes the juxtaposition so fascinating. Tarantino's villains love to hear themselves talk, while Bronson's heroes specialized in shutting men like that up. Behind the scenes, Carradine's role also came with real-world tension. By the time of Kill Bill, he had a reputation as both a gifted performer and a difficult personality. Tarantino, however, knew how to use those contradictions. He leaned into Carradine's eccentricities, turning them into narrative fuel. Bill's unpredictable mix of charm and cruelty, love and violence, is essentially Carradine turned inside out. Think about it. Bronson might sneer at Bill's verbosity, but he'd probably respect the menace Carradine conjures without needing to swing a sword. Sometimes silence can be scarier than any threat, but Carradine proved that the right words, delivered the right way, could make you squirm just as much. And Tarantino knew his audience would savor the discomfort. There's also something timeless about Bill's theatricality. Villains throughout film history, from Shakespeare adaptations to modern crime dramas, love to monologue. Bronson, the no-nonsense action man, would despise it. But Tarantino, the cinephile, revels in it. Carradine's Bill is a callback to classic movie villains who believe their words are as deadly as their weapons. So here's a thought to chew on. In a showdown, would you rather face a villain like Bill, who breaks you down mentally before striking, or a Bronson-style antagonist, silent, efficient, and merciless? Personally, I think most of us could endure a lecture more than a bullet, but that lecture would leave scars of its own. Carradine's Bill remains one of Tarantino's most haunting creations. For audiences, he's unforgettable. For Bronson, he'd probably mutter something under his breath, pull the trigger, and end the monologue before it ever began. Number 1. Morgan Freeman, The Shawshank Redemption. It almost feels strange to imagine Charles Bronson hating Morgan Freeman. After all, Freeman's reputation, both on screen and off, is built on calm wisdom, quiet dignity, and a voice so commanding it practically became Hollywood's conscience. But in the spirit of this tongue-in-cheek countdown, Freeman takes the top slot precisely because he represents the opposite of Bronson's terse brutality. Where Bronson's characters deliver justice with a gun and a glare, Freeman's most famous role in The Shawshank Redemption reminded audiences that sometimes hope, not violence, is the ultimate weapon. Freeman's character, Ellis Red Redding, narrates much of Frank Darabont's film, guiding viewers through Andy Dufresne's decades-long imprisonment. And near the end, Red finally embraces the very thing he'd once dismissed: hope. Reading Andy's letter, he recalls Andy's words: "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies."
Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies.
It's one of cinema's most uplifting lines, delivered with the kind of unforced sincerity only Freeman can muster. And it's exactly the sort of sentiment that might make a no-nonsense tough guy like Bronson roll his eyes. Not because it isn't true, but because Bronson's whole screen persona thrived on the idea that the world was merciless, that survival meant grit, not poetry. Imagine Bronson sitting in a darkened theater, arms crossed, watching Freeman preach hope while carving little rock sculptures. You can picture him grumbling under his breath: "Hope's nice, kid, but sometimes you gotta pull the trigger." That's the clash right there, the philosophical gap between two great screen presences. One offered audiences comfort, the other offered vengeance. Both spoke to different sides of human endurance. Still, even Bronson would have to admire Freeman's command of the screen. For an actor who rarely raises his voice, Freeman's Red somehow dominates Shawshank. His words cut deeper than a six-shooter, his philosophy more enduring than any vigilante's bullet. And maybe, just maybe, Bronson would admit that hope, though softer than his usual weapon of choice, isn't weakness. It's survival of a different kind. Off-screen, Freeman has always been praised as a collaborator, the kind of actor who elevates everyone around him. That's another thing Bronson might find annoying in a playful sense. Bronson was never about elevating others. He was about holding the center, standing alone, a silent anchor in chaos. Freeman's generosity of spirit, both in life and art, almost makes him too perfect, too untouchable. If Bronson were pressed to name one actor he hated, Freeman might ironically fit the bill, because how do you hate someone the world universally loves? But think about it. Isn't that the perfect twist ending? After running through a list of arrogant villains, swaggering tough guys, and long-winded monologuers, Bronson's biggest enemy turns out to be the one man whose words disarm audiences more effectively than any gunfight ever could. So let's throw it out there. Do you believe hope can be just as strong as Bronson's brand of justice? Or does survival in a hard world demand something harsher than words carved into stone walls? In the end, Morgan Freeman takes this top spot not because Bronson truly despised him, but because Freeman represents the other side of the coin. If Bronson was the embodiment of steel and vengeance, Freeman was the voice reminding us that humanity isn't dead yet. And in that contrast lies the real beauty. Cinema needs both. So here's the takeaway. Cinema needs both. It needs the Bronsons, who embody steel and silence, and it needs the Freemans, who remind us that humanity and hope still matter. One can't exist without the other, not if you want stories that stay with you. Now let me throw it back to you. Which of these imagined rivalries did you enjoy the most? Do you think Bronson would truly have bristled at over-talkative villains? Or deep down, would he have appreciated the balance they brought to the art of storytelling? Either way, the conversation continues, because that's what great movies do. They spark arguments, rivalries, and above all, memories that never fade.